Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever, depending on where you're joining us from. So, firstly, welcome to this Independent Food System Summit Dialogue on Pledge Now to Transforming Agricultural Innovation. So, we are really thankful that you've decided to join us today. We have seen quite a lot of interest in this dialogue. We've had about over 900 people register for this. In addition to that, we will be streaming live on a number of platforms, including LinkedIn and YouTube, so that we can make this accessible. This is a conversation that everybody needs to engage in. So thank you for joining us through these various platforms. My name is Dhanush Dinesh. I work for the CGIR for the Climate Change, Agriculture, and Food Security Research Program. We are one of the conveners of this dialogue, together with the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office, as well as Wageningen University and Research, where I'm based at the moment. We're also supported by a number of partners in this dialogue, and I will introduce each of them as we go through the program. But I just wanted to welcome you and say a couple of things on why we are actually having this dialogue. So firstly, this is a Food System Summit dialogue. So we are hoping to feed into the Food System Summit itself, but it is focused on COP26. And this is not by accident. We really think that both these agendas, and climate and food, are interlinked. And you cannot solve climate crisis without taking action on food, and you cannot solve issues around food systems without taking action on climate. And we want to bring both of these issues together. That's what we're trying to do here. And we are trying to do that through one particular lever of change. And this is a lever recognized by the Food System Summit as well, and that is on innovation. So agricultural innovation, how can that help us to transform food systems and address the climate crisis? That's what we are here to discuss. And this is particularly in the context of UK's COP26 presidency under the nature theme, where there's a focus on agricultural innovation. And this is part of that campaign where we're hoping to get your inputs to shape that campaign. So when we go to the COP26, we bring together a collection of stakeholders who are able to transform agricultural innovation. So it's a campaign that everybody can get involved in. Today's dialogue is a two-part dialogue. So the first part is today, where we want to do four things. We want to answer a few questions for you. What do we mean by transforming agricultural innovation? So that's the what. How do we actually do that? The how. And why do we need to actually do this? What is the case for transforming agriculture innovation? If everything's perfect, we don't have to transform it. And finally, and most importantly, the who. And we will bring together a few climate innovation champions here to discuss, who are leading the way, but you can also be the who. So we would really, at the end of the day, we'll set out how you can engage in this campaign and how you can be those innovation champions too. And we hope for your participation, because the more people we can bring in, the better. And because of the number of people we have today, the opportunities for interaction is not as much as we would like to. So we have over 900 people, but we have a online interaction platform on Slido. So the slide will be shown to you right now. So you can type in your questions to the panelists there, and we will have them answered during the dialogue today. But more importantly, for those of you who want to engage more, there will be an online call for ideas at the end of the dialogue today. And we will select the best ideas from there, and we will invite you on the 27th of April to have a more in-depth discussion. So the dialogue is certainly the intention. We want to crowd in ideas today, and we want to discuss those ideas in more detail on the 27th. So we hope you will stay tuned and engage in that. So that's the context. Now I wanted to welcome our first speaker, and Martin van Nieuwkoop, who's the Global Director of Agriculture and Food at the World Bank. He's been articulating in many different fora on the importance of agriculture innovation in relation to institutions, incentives, all the other important elements for food systems transformation. So I'm going to hand over to you, Martin, to tell us about the what, the why, and the how on agriculture innovation.
Well, thank you very much, Dhanush. I'm very happy to be part of the innovation lever discussions. I mean, the World Bank is very much involved in the finance lever for the Food System Summit. So on the why, let me start there. I would like to make 2 points. We clearly need more innovation in agriculture to achieve the SDGs by 2030. The reason is that the agriculture and global food system was already off track and moving in the wrong direction prior to COVID-19. Of course, COVID-19 is setting us back. And at the same time, the challenges remain. I mean, we still need, food for 2 billion more people by 2050. And at the same time, the carbon footprint of the sector needs to be reduced from 12 gigatons per year to 4 gigatons per year. So those challenges are even more daunting than they were before COVID-19. And for that reason, we need more agricultural research, we need more agricultural innovation. So that's my first point. My second point is that countries are underinvesting in agricultural research and innovation. This comes clearly out of a report that the World Bank did 18 months ago, Harvesting Prosperity. Technology change is the most important determinant of increasing agriculture productivity, total factor productivity. The returns are enormous, 30 to 40%. And what we see is that countries are underinvesting despite those enormous returns. And this is not because of lack of money, because public support, globally to agriculture and food is about $700 billion per year, as estimated by the OECD. So we clearly need to repurpose, governments need to repurpose their existing public support, to those very highly attractive investments that are needed to accelerate SDGs. So that's on the why. On the what, what needs to change, to make ag innovation more relevant and effective. It is estimated that if you include the hidden cost of the global food system, that the global food system is extracting, subtracting rather than adding value. So innovation, if you factor in those hidden costs related with environment and health, is not really serving, the global food system. So what needs to change? First, what needs to change is to refocus, and move away from a sole focus on productivity towards a focus on resilience. If you look at the frequency of extreme events in Africa, it used to be once every 12.5 years, and now it's once every 2.5 years. So a fivefold increase. So we need more innovation and research, to show to farmers, and provide lessons on how they can better manage those risks. Also, a very important point would be to focus on mitigation. And of course, the rice subsector, the livestock subsector are the major contributors of the greenhouse gas emissions in the agriculture sector. So we need to actually have more research and innovation on how we can reduce the carbon footprint in those two subsectors. And related to that also, reduce food loss and waste. A second point related to what is that climate smart agriculture solutions do not come as silver bullets and as blueprints. They come in packages, and those packages of solutions need to be adapted to local conditions. So we need, instead of upstream strategic research, we need more applied, adapted research, and we need better knowledge transfer so that farmers actually have the information to apply those improved practices in their fields and across the value chain. A third major change that needs to happen is to unlock the potential of digital and data-driven agriculture. This can really be a catalyst and an enabler of transformative change because it affects, so many aspects of the of agriculture and the global food system on farm, also when it comes to access to markets. So those 3 points on the what. Then on the how, how can we do better to deliver innovations more effectively and faster to farmers? 3 points here. One is to think of regional approaches to capture economies of scale and network effects. The bank has, to that effect, has invested in various regional agricultural productivity and innovation projects in Africa, West Africa, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, and those have been very, very successful. A second aspect related to the how is to think of how can we bring the private sector in more systematically. And in that, to that effect, pool mechanisms, where relevant research teams are agreed up front, and through price competitions, the private sector is incentivized, to deliver innovations. The World Bank is part of a $150 million consortium where we actually are trying out, this very innovative approach. Right now, we're working on a Vietnam emissions reductions challenge project, on a brucellosis vaccine challenge project, and the foot mouth disease challenge project. So we think this could potentially deliver innovations faster, which is needed. And a third reflection on the how is that there's need to step up investments in agriculture education as a smart way to spur innovation. Many researchers across the world working in ag research are actually aging. So there is need for a huge investment in young researchers, to come online. So to that effect, the world needs to step up, efforts on agriculture education. The bank is also doing that in our various projects to actually kind of make sure that this happens as a part of the third part of the how, as I say. So this is in a nutshell, Danush. The why, the what, and the how. To set the stage. The bank is putting the money where its mouth is. We are investing in this, and we also actually have made a commitment as part of scaling up investments in agricultural innovation to kind of increase and double our contribution to the CGIAR, as was announced 18 months ago at the UN Climate Action Summit. And we're looking forward, with everybody involved, to kind of pursue this agenda. Back to you, Belarus.
Thank you, Martin. That was super clear and super useful context setting for the rest of the discussion. And we will dive deeper into some of the hard questions that you raised and the priorities that you identified. But thank you so much for doing this, and also to the World Bank for supporting this campaign for the last year to shape this really. And that's much appreciated. Thank you, Martin. So Martin referred to one very important point, which is around repurposing public support, the amount of public support that goes in, that the underinvestment in agricultural innovation, and he referred to the OECD's work. And to dive deeper into this and the case for transforming agriculture innovation, we have from the OECD, Jonathan Brooks, who's the head of the Agriculture and Resources Policies Division within the Trade and Agricultural Directorate of the OECD. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danush, and thanks indeed for the opportunity to be here and to contribute to what promises to be a valuable and very timely event, given the political timetable. I've got a number of remarks that I think really reinforce a lot of the points which I fully agree with that Martin just made. And really the central claim that I would like to make is that there really needs to be much greater emphasis on innovation if agricultural support policies to address the wider needs of food systems, both nationally and globally. And the key points that I'd like to make in support of that claim are as follows. First, as Martin noted, food systems face a daunting challenge, what we've referred to as a triple challenge, with a need to firstly ensure food security and nutrition. Second, provide livelihoods for more than 500 million farmers worldwide, as well as others in the wider rural and food economy. And then thirdly, use resources sustainably while contributing to the mitigation of climate change. And the supporting point I would make to that is that it's impossible to meet any of those three challenges without sustainable productivity growth. And if you want to achieve sustainable productivity growth, then innovation is absolutely a paramount requirement. But the basic problem at the moment, I would suggest, is that innovation is currently marginal rather than central to agricultural policies, and that calls for a transformative policy agenda. So if we take this, what we call a triple challenge first on food security and nutrition, well, we know that we need to feed a world population that will be nearing 10 billion in 2050 and to improve nutrition. Yet over 700 million people worldwide are undernourished, and those numbers aren't going down, while over 1 billion people are overweight or obese, and those numbers are getting worse. So a lot of the directions of change are not looking good there. On sustainability, we need to accomplish that food security objective while using essentially the same amount of land and less water, while adapting to climate change and lowering greenhouse gas emissions. But our latest monitoring and evaluation work notes that progress on improving the agricultural sustainability of agriculture has stalled. And put another way, we've not decoupled productivity growth from the environmental stresses that productivity growth can create, such as rising nutrient surpluses or from rising emissions. And then on the livelihood side, well, we know the big challenge there, and yet we still face the irony that nobody's more likely to go hungry than a farmer who grows his or her food for their own consumption. So there's a big problem about the inclusive nature of agricultural development, or rather the lack of it. So across each of those areas, I suggested that sustainable productivity growth is essential. That's, after all, what enables that size of the pie to increase. And it means, by definition, if you have sustainable productivity growth, that we can increase food supply without adding to resource pressures. Of course, it's not without side effects that need to be managed. Innovation, the stress of competition, is something that's a benefit to innovating farmers, although we all know that it puts stress and adjustment pressures on those who are not at the frontiers. So it's essential, but it's not, and it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And I'd also echo, incidentally, Martin's point about the importance of resilience, where so often we see an emphasis on policies that are effectively about ex-post coping strategies, so coping with risk, rather than adapting and preparing for them and building structures that are robust to risks, but then when shocks have occurred, can also transform so that they're better adapted to risks in the future. So the foremost requirement for this sustainable productivity growth, of course, is innovation. You can increase agricultural production by increasing area, but globally there's little additional land available to be exploited sustainably. You can apply more inputs, such as fertilizer, but in many cases, inputs are already being applied at unsustainable levels. So that leaves the only other option, which is to combine land and inputs more effectively, which equates to increasing total factor productivity. And that's partly about technologies such as plant breeding, but it's also about applying those technologies effectively, in particular through improved management practices. And that in turn depends on the wider policy environment. So it's about technology, but it's also about the wider enabling environment through which technologies are applied. So just then on the numbers, I mean, if we look at agricultural policies across the 54 countries for which OECD measures support, we find that innovation is not where the policy effort is being concentrated. So Martin referred to the 700 billion that's transferred to the agricultural sector each year. Now, about 300 billion of that 700 comes in the form of higher prices, and that's paid for by consumers. Now, those policies undermine the functioning of the food system, and they're overdue for reform. They stimulate output, but globally they imply a misallocation of resources that undermines food availability and access. They contribute to unsustainable intensification, and they're an inefficient and an inequitable way of supporting farmers' incomes. So that's the 300 billion. The other 400 billion is transferred as budgetary transfers by taxpayers. And the majority of that is paid as income transfers to farmers. A relatively tiny amount, just 1.4 billion, is paid for public goods such as ecosystem services. And just over a bigger amount, just over 100 billion is paid to the sector, but not to farmers. And that's got some good and some bad stuff in it in terms of innovation, but about 80 billion is paid for innovation, infrastructure, and biosecurity. So those are investments that are fundamental to improving the productivity and sustainability of agriculture. So clearly a lot of the overall balance is de facto income or social support, which raises the question of whether this support is well targeted, whether it's warranted, whether it would be better provided by economy-wide social nets, social safety nets. But even so, less than 1/5 of budgetary expenditures in support of agriculture go to what we broadly define as innovation. And that suggests some misdirection of government support. And that's what people are referring to as the repurposing agenda. And then perhaps my final point then is that we know that budgetary support is not enough. We've done a number of innovation reviews ourselves at OECD, and we've got a report recently out on making better policies for food systems. And there are some common threads that stand out from that work. The first is that there has to be a business case to innovate and to improve productivity and environmental performance. We know that innovation systems need to be demand-driven, they need to be forward-looking and cost-effective, And there are key design features that matter: governance, the relative role of the public and private sector, the importance of international cooperation, and then crucially, the need to pay attention to adoption through support and advisory services. And I'm sure that these are issues on which the subsequent speakers will be well placed to elaborate. So I think with that, I'll leave it there, Danish, and thanks everyone for their attention.
Thank you, Jonathan. I mean, that was so compelling. I mean, I personally found it super useful. Thank you so much for taking us through the numbers and the triple challenge. And what I found most compelling, when you mentioned innovation is on the margins, it's marginal, the investment in it. And I think what we want to do with this campaign is to shift the dial from being marginal to be the center of the focus of that repurposing agenda, and doing so in a way for sustainable productivity and delivering for nature, climate, and people. That's what the COP campaign seeks to do. So to hear more about this COP campaign, what is being targeted, where we are now, we have a great speaker from the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, Vail Gnanendran, who is the Director for Environment and Climate. Over to you, Vail. We want to hear from you on what the UK is planning to do and how can people engage in this campaign.
Thank you, Danush. It's really great to be here. So thank you very much for inviting me to say a few words. And while I've got the floor, can I say thank you to CGIAR and also to Wageningen University for organising the event. I'm also going to just a big shout out to Martin and his team for the recent World Bank Climate Change Action Plan, which had climate smart agriculture there, very present there. So I just wanted to commend the bank and the team for kind of keeping this issue foremost, on the international agenda. So I just wanted to take the opportunity. So Danish, you wanted me to talk about COP26 and the opportunity that presents to make progress on food systems. And I guess I wanted to start by just really emphasizing the point you made in your opening remarks that, although this is a food systems summit dialogue, the food systems issue is so critical to climate action. We will not achieve 1.5 unless we make progress on food systems. That, the interlinkages between food systems and climate are kind of must be foremost. And so that's why it's really great to have the chance to come and speak about COP26 in the context of the Food Systems Summit dialogue. And just to really reassure everybody that as the incoming COP presidency, we really do see these issues as interrelated, and that both summits are essential to delivering on that transformation in food systems. And actually, I can't emphasize enough what both Martin and Jonathan have said in terms of agricultural innovation being key to that transformation in food systems. I was going to say a bit about the why, but I think Martin and Jonathan have said that far better than I could, why this is so important. So let me just really focus on the how of this and how we're thinking about this in the sense of COP26. So the first thing to say is, as we think about this for COP26, we very much think about this in the way you framed it, Danush. It's about people, nature, and climate. How do we catalyze action in that nexus of issues? We're doing that through, first of all, the Just Rule transition. This is a global initiative that's trying to bring together governments, farmers, businesses, local communities, and indigenous peoples to bring those communities together to lead a shift towards sustainable agriculture and food systems. And science and innovation has to be at the heart of that shift. So as part of the Nature campaign, which is one of our 5 campaigns under COP26, we have a strand of that which is on transforming agricultural innovation. And this part of the campaign aims to drive a step change in the scale and pace of agricultural innovation to meet future demand for food. And it has 4 objectives. The first of those is to mobilize and realign investment in agriculture research and development with climate resilient food systems. So bringing those agendas more closely together. The second is to develop the innovative solutions that we need. And I think, again, Jonathan and Martin set out why we need some of those solutions. The third is to build the evidence base. Jonathan talked about the business case. Part of that business case has to be the evidence of what works. And then the fourth and final aim is to kind of foster the partnerships that we need to bring those technologies to scale. And I was at the dialogue we had in November, Danush, as part of the Race to Zero, where I sort of introduced some of these elements of the campaign. And we have made some progress since then. The Transforming Agriculture Innovation part of the campaign was launched at the Dutch-hosted Climate Adaptation Summit in January. It was launched jointly by the UK Minister Lord Goldsmith, but also the Deputy Prime Minister of Netherlands, Carola Schouten. And in February, we hosted an event at the Committee on World Food Security to share evidence and insights on the value of this research and innovation in bringing about an effective transformation of food systems. And all of this work builds on the findings of the Global Commission on Adaptation. And we're continuing to refine and build the focus of the campaign as we have these sorts of dialogues, as we engage with stakeholders and as we engage with countries and the private sector. And as we've done that, we've identified a number of really key knowledge gaps where we've commissioned evidence reviews. For example, the first of those is in agroecological approaches in low and middle income countries. Also, the global public and private investments in agricultural innovations that are relevant to the global south. And we're going to have a pre-COP webinar series that will present the findings of these reviews as part of Italy's All for Climate campaign. So just kind of trying to bring this to a conclusion in terms of how we're thinking about this for COP. If we're going to innovate, scale, and deliver the transformation in agricultural innovation systems that we need, then we're going to have to bring together donors, researchers, farmers, and the private sector. And so we want all of these partners to join us in this effort to make pledges and contributions to do four things, really. The first is, as I said, to mobilize investment in agriculture R&D, to come up with those innovative solutions, to kind of help us on the evidence base, and to kind of build those partnerships. And those pledges and commitments, they can be financial, they can be material, they can be technical. So we want farmers and civil societies to bring their voice into these processes. We've always talked about innovations being responsive and kind of farmer-led, and I think we need to bring that voice much more to the fore. The pledges can be about how we test new approaches and how we share evidence. We want businesses to help scale up new climate resilient technologies. We want funders to increase their financial commitments, and we want researchers to focus on the solutions that we need. So we want ideally as many ideas and pledges and contributions today, and we can discuss those further through a dialogue we're planning to have on the 27th of April, which will then further inform the COP processes. So I guess just to sum up, Danush, we hope that in the lead up to COP, we can continue to work with all partners to transform agricultural innovation systems by making these really concrete pledges and by contributing to sustainable change. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Will, for that. I mean, you very nicely provided a bridge from Martine and Jonathan to our next item on the agenda, which is a roundtable with the climate innovation champions. But before we go there, thank you, Will, for doing this. And also it was really nice for you to bring in that perspective from November at the Race to Zero dialogues, where we talked about innovate, scale, deliver. And I think that's what really we want to do, what we want to achieve. And you set out the pathways in which we get there. And that was really helpful. And we will dive deeper into those pathways in the next part of the program. So, we're going to a panel of leaders, champions, who are actually, who are the people who are actually going to do this and who are doing this. And we want to learn from them what they're doing. So I'm hoping you will answer the question who. But before we go there, I want to remind participants that you have the option to pose your questions on Slido. And the slide will be showed to you again now. And please go there and post questions. I can already see some questions which are out there, but please add, and I will direct those questions to the panelists. So we have a panel of 4 climate innovation champions, we are calling them, and we can hear from them what they are thinking about innovation, what they are going to bring to the COP. So the first person that I would like to direct to is Lisa Sweet. Lisa is from the World Economic Forum, where she's head of Future of Protein, COVID response, and food health in the Food Systems Initiative. So that's really important issues. Lisa and Martin also talked about the COVID recovery and how food systems innovation is quite crucial in that. So what are you thinking in terms of the COP? What is it that you would like to bring from the World Economic Forum's perspective? And Wael mentioned the importance of partnerships, and I've always found it very impressive that you're bringing together stakeholders. So what would you bring in terms of partnerships and efforts to the COP?
Thank you so much, Danush. It's really a pleasure to be here today with everybody and with the distinguished speakers who spoke before me. Thank you for that fabulous context setting. As Danush mentioned, I'm really going to pick up on this key point of partnerships. And from the perspective of the World Economic Forum, that is really a central point where we feel like innovation is so central and so critical. The World Economic Forum is a space for public-private partnerships. And in the case of this agenda, in the case of bringing together these topics of food systems and climate change and nature critically, this is really not only a public-private partnership, but also a people partnership. We need the people at the center of that systems change and the innovation that will really drive forward this agenda. And those people in this particular instance are the farmers. Farmers as the stewards of our food, farmers as the stewards of the land and the nature upon which those food systems depend and the farmers depend, and farmers as the economic actors that they are. So that really led the forum to catalyze this new platform that's really entitled 100 Million Farmers and working towards transitioning towards net zero nature positive food systems. The platform is one that really seeks out and is working towards multi-stakeholder alignment, but also action. And in the alignment piece, we are looking to bring together, as mentioned earlier, the agendas of the food systems, of the climate space, of nature and biodiversity. We look at this collective whole as the carbon plus agenda, and really thinking through how this agenda brings together not only the different thematic agendas, but how it brings together the various stakeholder groups. Our ultimate overarching goal is to catalyze momentum and bring together the different activities and stakeholders in support of the public-private people transition pathways for 100 million farmers to be incentivized towards transitioning towards net zero, nature positive food systems. And we'll look to bring that overarching framework down, as our speakers earlier were saying, to the regional or the local levels, which is really where food systems action has to play out with the regional nuances, with the regional stakeholders, and with the regional actors that can support those transitions. In these regional action agendas, we're going to be looking at key areas of innovation, including data technology, knowledge innovation, including finance innovation, and critical, again, that partnership innovation. It's really an initiative that's all about scaling. Reaching 100 million farmers is a key target for us because that represents approximately 1/5 or 20% of the farmers around the world, which we see as that critical tipping point, which will help to catalyze a much greater global momentum.
Thank you, Lisa. I mean, that was super ambitious. And I think for COP26 and for the Food System Summit, we need ambition. If we are going to do business as usual ideas and initiatives, it's not going to get us there. And we will dive deeper into some of these issues in a moment. But let's go for a first round of questions to all the panelists. And the next panelist, the climate innovation champion that we have, is Jyotsna Puri from the International Fund for Agricultural Development, where she is director of the Environment, Climate, Gender, and Social Inclusion Division. So it's not just about climate change, but also leaving no one behind in that agenda. So bringing that people perspective. And I think IFAD's always done that with, the largest source for smallholder farmers on adaptation finance has been with IFAD, and you've tried to provide them access to climate finance. So Joe, what are you thinking in terms of COP26? What would you like to bring there, linking to the innovation agenda?
Thank you so much, Danush, for having me here. What we are bringing to COP26 is our ambition with the Adaptation for Smallholder Farmers Plus program. So this is ASAP Plus. For many of you, you'll know EFAD has been at the forefront of adaptation for smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers produce, and this is less than 5 hectares. So smallholder farmers are farmers who produce on less than 5 hectares of land in terms of plot size. But they produce more than 30% of the overall food for all of us globally. So, and they get less than 2% of just the climate finance flows that we are seeing globally. So look at the disproportionate and the unjust, I have to say, focus on smallholder farmers, and given the weight of the world that they carry on their shoulders, right? So what we are bringing really to COP26 is first, this idea of focusing on smallholder farmers and focusing on their needs to make them far more resilient, so the food on our table is healthier and better and more. Second, what we are bringing is this idea that we have to make agricultural research cool again. Many of the speakers before me spoke about this, and my PhD was in agriculture and natural resource economics. But the fact is that we all talk about agricultural innovation, but it's not cool enough yet for people to think about it as frontier discipline. But think of what's happening today. We know that there's digital technologies. My colleague spoke about it, but there are many other things that are happening that are new in today's world that can actually make this research cool again, which then lets us, through ASAP, through the adaptation for smallholder farmers, essentially design, test, and scale. So in terms of making agriculture innovation and research cool again, we have, of course, technology. We have digital data. We also have biology. We have far more insights on what works in agroecology, and one of my colleagues spoke about that. But we also have behavioral science. That is helping us think about, well, what can make the difference in the last mile? My favorite example, both of which, so 2 examples in terms of innovation, which is where ASAP is really focusing. So 2 very quick examples are first, in the domain of using blockchain technology for smallholder farmers so that they can adopt, it's easier for them to adopt agricultural, weather-based agricultural insurance. We all know it's good for smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers know it's good for them. They still don't adopt it because it's just really difficult. Blockchain technology, something that we have tested through our ASAP program, and now we are looking into scaling it up, can actually increase uptake by farmers from 8% to 30%. The second example is rural prosperity bond. So it's a financial innovation, but again, really cool. It really takes the consumer surplus that you're seeing on the ground as a result of agricultural investment and makes it so that it becomes an incentive for everyone who's participating to really be part of the game. And the private sector can then benefit. The third point that I quickly want to make now, Dhanush, is that I think what we don't recognize is that multilateral institutions and public institutions have possibly the largest appetite for risk and innovation that we know, far more than the private sector. And this sort of bucks the trend in our own thinking, but it's true. We are able to give grants, but then symbiotically also link them with, say, guarantees and loans, especially for ideas that are scalable, that are successful after they've been tested on a smaller scale. And that's what ASAP is doing, right? It's designing and then testing and then letting the rest of EFAD essentially scale it up and really make an impact on a large scale. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe. And I think my key takeaway today is going to be, let's make agriculture innovation cool again. And that's what we should do at the COP. I mean, all of these things, for it to happen, we need to make this work cool. And thanks for bringing that. That was very interesting. But also the point that you made about how, unjust was the word that you used, the system. And what Whale mentioned about the just rural transition aims to reset that, make a just rural transition. And I think EFAD has an important role to play in that. Let's go to our next panelist, who's Ishmael Sunga, who's the CEO of the Southern African Confederation of Agriculture Union. So we have a farmer representative. And Ishmael, I always see you at the COPs where you've always articulated the farmer's voice. And last time in COP25, you spoke about transformation of food systems in some of these events. And you've heard the ambition on the private and public sector side. What are you thinking? What are you thinking of bringing to the COP from a farmer perspective?
Thanks, Danush, and thanks for the brilliant presentation so far, and also the very exciting remarks. I agree with Ifad. Their sentiments obviously are very well in tune with ours for obvious reasons. COP is a good opportunity, as usual, for us as farmers' organizations to try and project our voices and try to influence the discourses around climate change. And there are a number of areas that we think are going to be important for us to to bring to bear at the next COP. The first one, in no particular order, really is about soil carbon. I mean, there is a lot of talk around that. It's an exciting area, an area that I think is innovative in its own right. But there is also a lot of ignorance by the farmer community for which it is intended about what it is. And indeed, even when I'm speaking to my staff in the office, very few of us can actually understand what it is, let alone the farmer around which we are saying they need to be farming carbon. So the question is really, how do we find innovative ways, creative ways of first making farmers aware of the value that is sitting in carbon? Because without understanding that, there is no action that is going to take place. The second point really is farmers are always, and they are renowned for it to be late comers on anything. They are late to get to the table and they eat the crumbles all the time. There is a good chance if we don't do anything as farmers organizations, as a collective community, to begin to mainstream them in the discussions now. Otherwise, they will end up being on the fringes as they always do on any crop, on any value chain. So it's a fundamental point for us, mainstreaming them in the design, in the thinking, and how do we do that? To me, it's an area of innovation. Maybe a point related to that is that innovation space is much more in the social engineering, on the policy aspects, maybe less on the technical. And when we talk about really climate change, how can we introduce innovation not only from the sort of scientific side, but also on the other aspect that perhaps matter? Because farmers need to see the value in what, and the value needs to translate better happiness to more money in their pockets and better welfare and better health. If those things are not going to bring that, then we're done. We're not going to move. The second point really is about how do we see farmers as, and we need really to keep on hammering this point, as researchers in their own right. Here, even in this meeting, I get a sense that there are farmers that side and there are researchers that side. So that dichotomy needs to be removed. Otherwise, we are not going to see things from the same view and things won't move. Until we begin to see things from the same view and see the same value, the frustrations about that these guys don't adopt will not go away. So let's find a creative way of putting the farmers as part of the researchers and even incentivizing them. Researchers get paid for the work they do. Farmers, when they do research, they don't get paid for that. There's no intellectual property around that. So let's find creative ways of also trying. I'm sure there's a lot of innovation that is happening out there. So let's also find ways of capturing it and rewarding it. And the final point, perhaps at this point, is the issue of repurposing public support towards incentivizing innovation by farmers. And because the other elements, I believe they are already covered. Researchers are in the business of doing research, but farmers are not. So how do we repurpose that to incentivize farmers to do climate research? And that climate research could be, a key element of it would be partnership between a formal research organization and a farmer. And they're working together purposely to unlock things. And you throw in that dimension, a new generation of climate actors, young farmers, and support them. And they also become practical climate researchers. That perhaps is an angle that could actually give us a bit of of trust in moving forward. I'll reserve the other comments later. Over. Thanks.
Thank you, Ishmael. That was very helpful. And Joe, maybe I'll come back to you on that, because that behavioral science angle, and that relates to what Ishmael said, but we'll come to that in the second round. But thank you for that. And my key takeaway is farmers should not be latecomers. And this whole agenda and campaign on transforming agriculture innovation systems has farmers at the center of that. And farmers are the innovators that we need to look at. So thank you for that. But now we've heard from the public sector, the private sector, the farmers, and the fourth dimension is the researchers themselves. And I'm told these four dimensions come together as the Dutch diamond. And so to enlighten us about the Dutch diamond, and this is not easy for research institutions. There are a lot of challenges and opportunities too. So to tell us more about this, we have Anne-Marie Groot from Wageningen University and Research, where she's a senior researcher on adaptation to climate change. So Anne-Marie, can you tell us about the Dutch diamond approach, and what are the challenges and opportunities? What's stopping us?
Yes, thank you, Danish. Indeed, in our so-called Dutch diamond approach, government, private sector, knowledge institutes, NGOs, civil society organizations, farmer organizations work together on so-called inclusive, integrated, and innovative solution to food system challenges. And I think some of the previous speakers have mentioned these challenges already. It's not only about food security or food insecurity, it's also about nutrition, environmental degradation, and inclusiveness. Each party in the diamond approach, which is in fact an innovation system itself, each party is indispensable to arrive at innovation and implementable solutions that address food system challenges. I would like to share a few lessons on my personal account. I think one of the first lessons is about the need for diversity and the room for failure. The Dutch are very good at compromising. I think we Dutch, we have even a word for that, polderen. But for innovation systems to bring about innovative solutions, it is very important to look for diversity. Collaborating partners need to be open-minded towards differences. So differences in terms of knowledge, perceptions, and interest, but also in terms of solutions, searching for sufficient alternatives and context-specific options, solutions. So the Dutch diamond approach is not so much about compromising, it is about negotiation, conflict resolution, experimentation, and room for failure. The second lesson I would like to share is about the key role of NGOs, civil society organizations, farmer organizations in this diamond approach. Especially the NGOs and civil society organizations and the farmer organizations, they do have context-specific knowledge and data, especially on cultural and social aspect, but also on environmental aspect. They are much closer to everyday practice on the ground than governments and companies. They know the people in the places and they know the risk they face. So that is key, because I think every approach that addresses food systems challenges in an innovative way must be a people's approach, placed in a local context. So what works in the Netherlands does not automatically work in Kenya, for instance. My last comment is a bit more a kind of plea or a recommendation. The diamond approach is claimed to be an inclusive approach, to develop inclusive food systems, which is about a fair distribution of cost and benefits. But I think there is an important role for research to critically examine this claim. To put it a bit more personally and in a more concrete way, I'm involved in the CRAFT project, which is a project in East Africa. It aims to climate-proof a food system, climate-proof a value chain, through working with the private sector, input suppliers, processing companies. And the ultimate aim is to increase the climate resilience of the entire value chain, but also to increase the resilience of smallholder farmers. And I think it's a very important role for research to critically examine whether that will happen in the end.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I especially like your point about room for failure. I think that's super important. So we've run out of time now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a rapid fire round with all of the panelists. You have 1 minute each to respond. I'm going to pick some of the questions which have come up and some of the conversations which have come up as well. So Lisa, first question to you. So one of the questions that came up was around COVID-19. We've seen so much emphasis on innovation, not just vaccine development, technology, ways of working. There's been transformations all around. And you're heading COVID response and the Food Systems Initiative of WEF. So how do you think we can learn from this for agriculture innovation?
Great. I think we saw some really tremendous innovations coming out as a result of COVID. And one I would highlight in particular is the activity that happened in Kenya, really bringing a series of different stakeholders together, having a strong focus on the digital and data ecosystems and sharing of information amongst unusual parties, and really pulling together in a common collective effort amongst the disparate stakeholders to identify, to understand the trends that were happening and to co-create on some of the solutions and challenges that need to be in the ecosystem. And I think this approach of really having a regional focus is one that we at the World Economic Forum very much support. And as Anne-Marie said, that what works in the Netherlands doesn't work in Kenya, for instance. We need to embrace this and understand and really directionally focus efforts, not only at the systems change that needs to happen at the global level through big convenings, but critically on the ground through the regional opportunities that are brought to bear and the stakeholders who can play into that.
Thank you, Lisa. Excellent answer. So I'll turn to Joe. Joe, I think I have two questions for you, which I have to cover in 1 minute. So one is building on what you said about behavioral science. Agriculture innovation is not just about crop breeding. There's more to it. And Ishmael touched upon that as well. How do we apply behavioral science more creatively to address that adoption gap? And second is someone's asked, if you talked about making agriculture innovation cool again. So who would be our unusual suspects and champions to do this?
Ooh, who would, okay, the second question is tough, but I'll try. Okay, on the first question on behavioral science, lots of examples out there, and I'm not even going to try and cover the entire landscape, but just, recent study, Dominican Republic, we know that policy does not mean good implementation or good practice. Translating policy into good practice requires this nudge or the use of behavioral science technologies. And so an example in the Dominican Republic, unfortunately not IFAD's example, but something that we are thinking about as we go forward is in the collection of taxes. Collection of taxes went up $193 million just because you could send out letters to households as well as firms in the Dominican Republic. That's, I think, 0.2% of the overall GDP of the Dominican Republic, and it cost almost next to nothing. This has been seen, the lack of adoption of agricultural technology as well as behavioral processes has been seen amongst smallholder farmers. And my example of agricultural insurance, of bringing in the private sector where the incentives are not aligned in the baseline scenario are all examples of where we are trying to use behavioral economics and alignment of incentives to essentially bring in new kind of stakeholders into what is quite an old field, right? So that's trying to make it cool again. And who are the non-traditional actors that we would like to bring in? I think it is not just the universities, but I think the private sector. The private sector is non-traditional. They need to be able to take on more risk, and currently they aren't. So from where we are sitting, we are also thinking about financial innovation, not just technological and not just process-based innovation, but also financial innovation. And that's something that we do need all of those actors to come together, like Anne-Marie said. Thanks.
Perfect, Jo. Thank you. So over to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, you articulated some very important issues there. So what would you like to see at the COP itself? From your personal perspective as a researcher, what would you like COP to deliver so that you have the room to failure, the ability to be critical, but also transform agriculture innovation? 1 minute. You're muted.
May I share one hope?
Please do.
And one recommendation?
Sure.
What I really hope for is that when we discuss food system challenges and the climate change, that we use an integrated perspective. And I think we have said it before, it's not only about yield and yield gaps, it's also about biodiversity, nutrition, inclusiveness. So I hope that we will bring in to use a food systems perspective in our debate, as it supports an integrated view on feeding the world under climate change conditions. So that is one hope. And I have another recommendation. It's also kind of hope, but it's mere a recommendation. Nowadays, we hear a lot about nature-based adaptation, nature positive or nature inclusive approaches, agroecological approaches, and their claims to positively address climate change issues. What I hope is that there will be attention, there will be funds for doing a critical assessments by research in collaboration with others to really assess whether this claim, because they all claim to have to positively address climate change issues, whether this claim is right or not, because that would be the way to develop scientific evidence for this kind of nature-based approaches. But we shouldn't discuss those nature-based or nature-positive approaches in isolation, but in combination with other approaches like sustainable intensification. Because nature-based approaches that work in the Netherlands might not work for smallholder farmers in Kenya.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. We're out of time, so we need to stop now. But Ishmael, I want to give you the last word. And I'm going to leave it open-ended. You have 1 minute. Tell us, have we missed something? Is there anything that's important to you and for farmers at large that we haven't considered today? Please flag.
I think the most important and perhaps strategic area for us, for me in particular, is really to try and crowd in everyone to bear with the problem. I think that is what is missing. Why is it that it is farmers who have to be resilient and everyone else is somehow not a problem? Well, why should it be the farmers alone? Why don't we all come together and share the problem together? Perhaps if we devise innovative ways of sharing it and making everyone pay because everyone is complicit in the crime. If we don't do that, we'll always talk about the same thing. So let's even out. And that risk will transfer from the poorest to other elements. And that actually results in better incomes and better services for them. Over. Thanks.
That's actually perfect, Ishmael. Crowd in everyone together. And we have an opportunity to do that under this campaign. So that's a perfect entry point to the next aspect, which I'll cover in 1 minute, which is to say, this is part of the COP26 campaign, and there is an opportunity to crowd in ideas. So at the moment, you will be shown a slide, which has a link there where you can go and you can put in your ideas. And I see in the questions, there are some questions about how do I pledge support to this campaign? How do I get involved? How do you crowd in? So go to that link, and there is an online form which you can fill out with your ideas. You've heard some great ideas from our champions, from our speakers. Are there other ideas we've missed? Are there things you're doing that you would like people to know at the COP? What would you like to bring to the table? So you could be a researcher, you could be a research funder, you could be an implementing agency, implementing innovations. You could be a farmer who wants to innovate and wants the system to change, to enable the farmer to innovate. So you could be any of these stakeholders. So if you have an idea, if you want to crowd in now. So go to that form and fill it out. It's very simple. And what we will do is we will look at your ideas. We'll come to, we want to involve everyone, and we're making it open, but we want to have a good, deep conversation with each of you. So we'll bring in the best ideas together on the 27th, and we'll discuss with you and see how we can make it part of the COP26 campaign. So that's our offer to you, our ask to you. So please come in, crowd in, inspire us, and let's make agriculture innovation cool again. So I would stop at this point and thank you so much to our great speakers and champions. It was a really exciting discussion. I'm sorry if you didn't get enough time, but time is short. People have other meetings to go to, but this was absolutely amazing. Thank you, everyone.